Afternoon, everyone. I find myself tethered to the technology here. Have you got it there? It's a long time ago I was asked to give a talk at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, so you're forgiven for nodding off. Excuse me if I might do the same thing. My name is Brian Reilly. I'm the head of department and professor in wildlife management at Tshwane University of Technology's Department of Nature Conservation. I've been in the conservation business my whole professional career. I serve on a number of national and international organizations responsible for conservation, so suffice to say, I have picked up a bit of experience related to conservation. Oh, do you want to turn the fan off? That's going to be a bit of a problem. Okay. All right. Pull the plug out the fridge there. Better? Okay, can you hear now? Right, good. Suffice to say, the bad news is that I normally get invited to places twice, the second time to apologize for the first time. So bear with me while I go through this. Garth came to see me several months ago. He talked to a friend of a friend, and they got to a colleague of mine at Onderstepoort in the veterinary faculty, and he was referred to me, and I said, come through and have a chat. So we've had a bit of a chat, and he's given me his insight into this extremely complex issue related to Marloth Park. There's thousands of people involved. There are 20 different organizations. There's government departments and municipalities and God knows what all. And it's taken a serious amount of brain power just to try and work out who's who in the zoo and what's happening, and try and advise Garth as to what I think we should do in terms of moving forward with the management of Marloth Park. In the meantime, I get around South Africa a lot. And there's always been stuff surfacing about Marloth Park in Mpumalanga and the mismanagement of the habitat. So when I talk to people at Mpumalanga, the regional ecologists and stuff, there's very often a story comes up about Marloth Park and the fact that it's overgrazed and it's mismanaged and. Can we have the next slide there, please? As soon as you're in control of it. Right. So let's look at Marloth Park. It's difficult to put something together, but let's have a look at the facts I have. It's an investment based on lifestyle. We're all in agreement with that. You've bought into a certain lifestyle, you've made an investment, probably a lot more than I can afford. It's natural resource based. In other words, if the natural resource that you have there in the animals and the habitat were to disappear, then number one becomes a bit of a problem. It is an undertaking. As an undertaking, it's subject to a whole bunch of legalities, it's subject to a whole bunch of business principles, etc., etc. What we do see that is in terms of appreciation of your investment and in terms of value addition to what you have, that's not happening. That's what I get. Governance is an issue. It doesn't exist. We live in a country where we have a structure, irrespective if we're falling apart in some places. The governance structure in South Africa under the King 3 Commission reports is world class. We're the leaders in the world in this kind of stuff. Sustainability is questionable. We've put a question mark next to the sustainability of your undertaking at Marloth Park. Accountability. There's a lack of accountability. Nobody can say who's in charge exactly and who's responsible for what. That all leads us to a number of risks. Now, I'm not talking about conservation yet. I'm not talking about wildlife management. I'm not talking about ecology. I'm talking about logic here. So far I've done nothing but move in the realm of internal audit, the functional audit. Give me the next slide, please. The risks that arise from the previous slide are that there's no ecological management plan. It doesn't exist. There's no suitably qualified manager. There may be one, but I wouldn't call them suitably qualified. There's third, fourth, nth party external involvement. So there's people that have got their oar in this undertaking from everywhere, and at odds with one another. There's no continuity of funding. There's funding, it comes in, it's dispersed, but the continuity is not guaranteed. There's no mechanism for continuity of funding. There's definitely overexploitation. There's overgrazing. There's people are coming in doing tourist activities, etc., etc. The place is being exploited, whether we like it or not. There's a number of illegal activities taking place. poaching taking place. There's people in and out doing all sorts of things. The security is not what it should be. And from all of that, we have increased environmental impact. In other words, overall, the impact of the activities on the environment are significant. The next slide, please. So, the bones of contention relate to a political climate which has been created with the relationship with the municipalities. There's tension between Marloth Park and the local communities. We have an enormous problem in that everybody who has anything to do with Marloth Park is an amateur ecologist. They all think they know something, which clouds and muddies the waters for people who do know something to function and get it done. They're a bunch of consultants hovering like flies because there's money to be made. So elke Jan Rap en sy maat in that part of the valley down there will do consultancy work for you, and they will charge you quite happily because you guys are a cash cow. You've got money in the bank, you have a bunch of questions, but nobody's looking after the whole overall issue. Incidentally, I haven't charged anything yet. Right. Let's have a look. Let's look theoretically. What constitutes ecological management best practice for a wildlife undertaking? The most important thing is the characteristics of management imply decision making. In other words, there has to be decisions taken, they have to be taken consequentially, and they have to be followed through. To take a decision, the best thing you need is decision support. Taking a decision with no information is sometimes necessary, but it's not good. You want to buy a new car, you look through the specs. How many kilometers per liter will it do? What colors does it come in? Does it have leather seats? That's information that allows you to make a decision. What you have at Marloth is no information. So a lot of decision making is being taken in the dark at the moment. There is no information. That leads us to decision support. We like to, as ecologists and scientists, put into what we call a decision support system. Now, an ecological management plan is exactly that. It's a decision support system to provide continuity in terms of management objectives of where we're going. Next slide, please. This decision chain in ecological management is critical because it has to have a record of a decision. If you take a decision related to the management of any species or the habitat or any part of the biodiversity, it has to be recorded somewhere. In which minutes of which meeting are these decisions? That decision is then subject to monitoring of the outcome of the decision. And that's where the scientists come in and potentially the consultants, whatever, but they have to be given the framework within which they must work. What is their mandate? What is their terms of reference? And there has to be a feedback loop between the monitoring and the record of decision. So the next time you meet, the monitoring has got to answer to that decision that was taken as to whether or not we're achieving it. We're busy with ecology here. We're talking in time spans of thousands of years. We're not talking about stuff that's going to happen overnight. We're dealing with drought cycles, dealing with soil formation. We're dealing with a whole bunch of different things. Right, next slide, please. Right. Now let's look at wildlife management. We have a country where approximately 22 million hectares is in private hands as run as some sort of wildlife undertaking. We know they've got golden wildebeest and black springbuck and all sorts of things, but essentially 22 million hectares of South Africa is under private wildlife. If we add to it our conservation estate, officially, fully a quarter of South Africa is busy with wildlife in one way or another every day. If we look at the ecotourism industry, game viewing, the investment you people have made, we're looking at between 12 and 14% of GDP of the country. Wildlife's a big deal in South Africa. It's an enormous deal. Our deputy president has 2 game ranches. He buys and sells game. He's just as much, he's got the same khaki shirt as I have, and he walks around and he's part of it. And it's extremely important to the country. Just press a button there and have a look. If we look at wildlife management, you just need to press a button. Some stuff's going to come up here. Right. If we look at management, there are 5 different paradigms of management. On the left, benign neglect over here. The next one's linear intervention. Then what we call deferred action management. Then we have over here passive and active adaptive management. This is the theory of wildlife management. Benign neglect means we do nothing. Linear intervention, and there's a red line there, is what most people do. That's called crisis management. We intervene when we have a perceived problem, but we don't know what the outcome was. So everybody runs around every year in July and says, we need a game plan. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. What are you going to do with those numbers? If you don't have the political will to manage to cull an animal, what are you counting them for? In other words, this is this causal relationship between decisions we take, the monitoring, and the outcome from that stuff. Deferred action management, the government loves that one. We don't have enough information, so let's just sit and wait. We'll take our plastic chairs outside and sit under the tree, and we'll order some Kentucky, and sooner or later someone will have enough information so we can take a decision. Over here, importantly, passive adaptive management and active adaptive management is working through feedback loops and actually doing the work. Active adaptive management over at this end makes room for experimentation in management. In other words, let's do something without knowing what the outcome is so that we can measure the outcome so we know in the future what will happen. The Kruger National Park over here on the right, if you go and look at the website, has probably the best management plan in the entire world. But it's active adaptive management. In other words, they've changed how they burn. They've changed culling because they've got enough information to say what they did didn't work. Burning a block out didn't work. They now use a helix with fire starters, which they drop from the aircraft. So you have burns going in different directions. But in this experimentation, you'll remember a couple of years ago, 2 rhinos got fried. The public went nuts. The 2 rhinos in the scheme of the 9,000 in Kruger was irrelevant. But we knew from the experimentation what the outcome was. I'm very heavily involved in Kruger and what we do. And in fact, at the moment, while I'm standing here, I've got 2 teams in the field looking at the vegetation on the burn blocks, where we have exclusive burn blocks that haven't burned for 60 years. And we have burn blocks that have been burned every year in different regions of Kruger. We're busy measuring in terms of biodiversity at this exact moment where we stand in terms of fire and its impact on the vegetation biodiversity. We've also managed to prove around Satara that they have a differential density of ungulates on their burn experiments, which has complicated the whole issue. The result we're seeing is not only fire, also herbivory. But Kruger, if you want to go and have a look, that's a real management plan. And it's run by about 30, 35 scientists and 200 scientists around the world because it's considered to be a laboratory for the world. Okay, next slide. Oh, I'm finished, look. Anyway, this whole thing goes back to 2 scientists by the name of Walters and Hilborn, if you want to look at any of their stuff, that wrote on ecological optimization and adaptive management. It all arises out of the fisheries management in the Pacific Northwest. And the fisheries management of the Pacific Northwest is one of the greatest examples of wildlife management there is. Because you can imagine what the potential impact is on that resource. Everybody wants a salmon. Everybody wants to eat one and they want to sell one. So you can understand in that whole Pacific Northwest between the United States and Canada what the issues are related to a salmon fishery. 3 years ago, I was in Alaska when the first salmon arrived, and it's been so successful, their management. Everybody's got what they wanted within the quotas, and the first school of salmon that arrived when I was there 3 years ago was 8 miles wide and 25 miles long. That's how successful that management has been. Instead of less salmon, they have more salmon. The problem now is the Japanese are trying to get in on it by catching the salmon before they get to US territorial waters. So there's other issues in the politics. But this is not something we thought up here in Kruger. There's world scientists working on this kind of thing. Okay, next one, please. Somebody wants to read, it's there. There's some definitions. But ideally what we want to head for is active adaptive management, which incorporates research into conservation action. Specifically, it is the integration of design, management, and I was going to say, the monitoring to systematically test assumptions in order to adapt and learn. Ecology, we never have all the information. We have to adapt and learn as we go along, which means we have to have two things, continuity and money. Without those two, we're going nowhere. Next. Why do we do it? We do it because conservation and wildlife undertaking projects take place in complex systems. Not one of us sitting here knows exactly what the functioning is of the ecosystem in Marloth Park. Nobody has spent 20 years looking at the soils, the vegetation, the change in vegetation structure, the grazing and browsing animals, their condition, their numbers, their stocking rates, and their carrying capacities. Nobody's done that. We've been touching here and there like I touch a hot plate without getting burnt. Our world is constantly and unpredictably changing. I'm sure many of you have been at Marloth Park for many years. The whole world's changed from when you first got involved. Our competitors are changing and adapting. There's other places you can take your money to and go and invest in a wildlife undertaking. It wasn't the case 20 or 30 years ago. There's now plenty of places to invest in buyouts. Immediate action is required. Whether we like it or not, some action has to take place. There's no such thing as complete information. In our business, in wildlife, we don't have all the information, we never will. And we can learn and improve. Unfortunately, I turn 60 next month. I fall into that category of dogmatic white men that know everything. I fall in that category. I have them who work for me. They are a bigger problem than anyone else. Because we saw that once before and it doesn't work. We tried it, it doesn't work. And they all know better. It's unfortunately a world we live in, and it's very difficult as you get older, as many of you know, to reprogram yourself and say, I actually don't know what's going on here, I need to listen. Okay, next please, thank you. All right, what's our ideal? How do we go about it? And there's something we call a procedural model, of which I'm the author of, and what I teach my students, okay, we have a wildlife undertaking, we've got a patch of land, what are we going to do? How are we going to get to this decision support system? Last time I had one of these, I was on a drip. Okay, next please. What we have to do is right at the top of what we do is we have to set something called an horizon view. Where do we want Marloth Park in the medium term? 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, when you're no longer here and your kids own the place, where do you want it? To do that, we have to set objectives and goals. Now, if you ask average people, they don't know the difference between the two. They use them loosely. An objective normally starts with the word to, and it's not in scientific terms what we call necessarily measurable, testable, or falsifiable. Where the goal under the objective has to be measurable, testable, and falsifiable. Statistically, that is. Right, next, please. Let's go and have a look what we would put together. What is our procedure? We have a horizon view. We've got to get to that horizon view. What is it? Are we busy with biodiversity? Are we busy managing rare and threatened ungulate species? Do we want predators involved? What are we going to do? That's something where everybody has an egg to lay. Next, if we put in our objectives and goals, we've got to set these objectives and goals. We've got to word them. We've got to, under each one, see what's measurable. How are we going to measure it? Give you an example. We want to go here. One of our objectives is to manage rare and threatened species. So let's go out and buy 100 sable antelope. We buy 100 sable antelope. That objective is not necessarily measurable, testable, or falsifiable to say we want sable antelope. What is the goal under that? The goal under that has to be achievable. Buy 100 sable. That's achievable. Once we've got these 100 sable, we want 12% per annum increment in the population. That's achievable. We can measure it. Go out to our binoculars and count them after they're born and say, are we achieving it or not? Very importantly, we've got to rank these objectives as well and the goals, but we'll talk about that now. Next slide, please. Every one of these goals has a number of actions that have to take place. And the actions are clear. If I have my sable antelope and I want 12% per annum, somebody's got to go out here and find out what the increment is. That's a job. Those bits and pieces of work go into what we call an action plan, which you hand to the man in charge or woman in charge who's qualified and say, here's your job description. Here's what you have to do. Next slide, please. This, of course, implies a cost. Frozen there. This implies a cost. In other words, what is the cost of doing this? I need 20 liters of fuel. I need the best Leica binoculars you can find. I need this, that, and the other thing. I need an aerial survey. I need an aerial count. If I can do an aerial count, what is it going to cost? Now suddenly I've got all this stuff together. I know how much my management for a year is going to cost me. This is a double-edged sword, because the person managing now has this action plan they have to fulfill. You can nail them for not doing it, and they can nail you for not providing the money. Because without the money, they can't operate, they can't do their work. But you need to know where the money's going. Next one, please. Trevor Manuel's favorite there is a medium-term expenditure framework. In other words, this budget allows us to project into the future, to answer to each of you as shareholders and say, what is it going to cost in the next 10 years? How long does a Land Cruiser last? There is tax easements that haven't been utilized, that are not being taken advantage of in many of these wildlife undertakings. So you've got to have somebody on the financial side that makes sure that this stuff, your tax stuff, is in order. Only then, when we've got this in place, can we say we need to expand the baseline information. What do we know about the place? I'm sure a bird list exists. Got some information. We know what the soils are. We know what the geology is, because that doesn't change in our lifespan. But do we know what insects occur there? Part of your biodiversity. Maybe a selling point. It may be interesting for tourism. It may be rare and threatened. It might occur on one hillside. We might have reptiles occurring there that occur nowhere else. I'll give you an example of a survey we did last year on 500 hectares of footprint near Steelpoort of a mine. We identified 1,300 insect species in 500 hectares. That is significant biodiversity. But what is happening is everybody is staring at the rooibos. They are completely insignificant in terms of biodiversity. We may have to shift people's mindset who live there to say you're going to see fewer bokkies, but have you had a look at the butterflies? Have you had a look at the birds? But what are we doing? We're concentrating on this tiny little part of biodiversity, and we're not looking at the rest. We're managing for a handful of bokkies, which foreigners want to see. You've seen them. You've seen them, Paul. You know what it looks like. Right. Only then does research kick in of any sort, because research is needs-driven. It's only out of this management plan that you can identify priorities and go to universities and say, we need this done. Here's the budget. You can't have people doing ad hoc work if it's not guided by your management and needs-driven. What do you need to manage? We may have to take a management decision with no information, but we certainly have a list of what we're going to need in the near future. And then we go to all the universities and say, if you've got a student who's doing nothing, we've got a bucket and a little bit of money, we need this done. Hold them accountable and it'll get done. That's what they do. We're just prostitutes at universities. We're just looking for money anyway. We've got students to train and we need money for them. Okay, next. The most important of everything, and press the next one as well, is that every one of these requires feedback. None of this means anything if there's no feedback to the horizon view, the objectives and the goals. It might feed into a goal, it might feed into objective, it might feed in right to the horizon view. And what you find down here in this stuff that you're busy with is you may find something that will change this completely. We've had it happen in several wildlife undertakings where we found a butterfly species that occurs only on one copy. It becomes from nothing to a priority over the sable, over the white rhino, over the black rhino, because it's a priority. It's survival as a priority. We can't have the bokkies going up there and eating everything because they're going to work this poor skoenlappertjie out of his habitat and we've got moeilikheid. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you need to do. Right, next slide, please. Okay, the relationship of goals and objectives to one another is important. Obviously, we can't manage lions at Marloth and sable antelope. Those are what we call conflicting goals and objectives. You can't do the two together. To have the two together, you need 100,000 hectares, at least. They can be benign. They've got nothing to do with one another. A lot of your objectives you have currently in terms of the animals you have, there's enormous competition between these animals in terms of grazing and browsing. Do we really need to produce so many impala? Or they can be complementary to one another. The management of one species advantages another species. These are the kind of things that we have to think our way through. Next. Now, what you need to do is in setting these objectives and goals, they've got to have levels. In other words, an objective can become a goal can become an objective can become an horizon view. You've got to shuffle them around and you've got to get agreement on it. You have to prioritize them. You can't do everything. What's important in the short term, the medium term, and the long term, which means you need feedback constantly. You have to find with everything what we call, as scientists call, the permissible limits of change. Let's, for argument's sake, say you decide, in terms of your management, you've got 400 impala. You're going to maintain that population at 400, which implies you've got to count them. It implies you've got to get rid of some. How we get rid of some is a different issue. It has ethics tied to it and all sorts of things. Plus, you're going to need a few recipes because they breed quite well. So what happens here is these permissible limits of change. At which point are you going to react in management? Are you going to react when there's 401 in your index that you counted? Are you going to react when there's 399? So we set what are called permissible limits of change. To say, yes, we want 400 impala, but only when they hit 500 will we react. And we're going to knock them back to 300 or to 250. Those we call permissible limits of change, so that we don't run around doing stupid things, saying there's 2 more than we should have or 3 more than we should have. We call those permissible limits of change. We put it in the vegetation as well. We look at the vegetation, we pick key species, and we say when these key species drop below a certain level or increase above a certain level, we will react. Whether it's fire, whether it's bush clearing, whatever the management action is, moving the water points, whatever, those are management actions. We need to monitor goal achievement. Are we achieving the goals we set? If we're not doing that, we're wasting our time. And we might as well all go for a beer and let it happily continue with its benign neglect. Next slide, please. Now, what you can do in terms of prioritization, and that's part of the problem, setting goals and objectives is going to set you guys off into an argument that has no end. Because one guy says, I want to shoot the impala, another says, no, it's not going to happen. Someone's going to be in tears because we like the book, because we're not going to shoot them, they've got names, we feed them toast and whatever. But what you've got to do is you have majority rules. And unfortunately, what you have to do is to reach consensus between 4,000 people or 10,000 people is almost impossible. So you have only one choice, and that's to workshop it with the most people present, and you need to prioritize statistically where people are not involved in the decision making of how they got to that point of what their decision was. If you have a group of people, what happens inevitably, there are stronger characters who influence people. So whether you like it or not, the opinion of stronger characters tends to come out. Now, we scientists use something called the Delphi method. Somebody may have heard about the Delphi method, but the oracles of Delphi in ancient Greece, the king of Greece used to go along there, and he used to speak to the oracles, and they used to tell him what he should do. Should he go to war? Should he slaughter his wife? Should he slaughter his children? What should he do? And in the ancient world, that counted. Unfortunately, recently they found out that at Delphi, where the oracles were at that temple, is on a crack in the geology. And some very noxious gases sneak up through these cracks, and these chicks were all as high as hell that were at Delphi anyway. So Agamemnon got it all wrong going over to Troy to kick everybody's backside. Right. Okay. Next slide, please. What this looks like is it looks like this. We can statistically evaluate everybody here. And there's the number of goals that have been prioritized to a score of 1,000. It adds up to 1,000. Don't worry about the stats. But this is called a pairwise comparison. And in this pairwise comparison, there's something called K, which is called Kendall's coefficient of concordance. In other words, how well did you make decisions in deciding between goal 1 and 2? Because you have one half of this table, you filled in the other half as a 1. If the column was more important than the row, you scored it to 1. Other way around, you scored it to 0. But what the program does then, the stats, is it measured, how consistently people took decisions. So one out here, this panelist, no names, he has 100% in terms of how he takes decisions of one against the other. You'll find some people are down at 30%. In other words, they're not consequential in how they take decisions. But the advantage of methods like this is there's no influence of one member over another one. So I give you a piece of paper, you go and sit down under the tree and think about it yourself. So you cannot be influenced by another person. This is the Rolls Royce. We can do it. The scientists can do it. That's what we get paid for. Anyway, next slide, please. Okay, these action plans that you have are determined by this funding and budget that you need. You can only manage if you have money. And what normally happens is, even though you set perfect objectives and goals, you're going to be restricted by the funding you have in terms of achieving it. In other words, you've got to have a process through which you achieve things, because you never have all the money at once to do everything. Okay, next slide, please. Potential funding models that we have. How do we get to continuity of funding, which is the biggest problem in all wildlife undertakings? Next one, please. What we've found is, in terms of models, the best model that works is a trust fund. Because a trust fund is subject to a whole bunch of legalities and transparency, and trustees carry the responsibility for the decisions they make about the use of that money. It also allows money to accumulate, it allows money to be invested, it has all the financial mechanisms with it that can be utilized. So we've found that the trust fund provides continuity of funding. Because if you have a continual inflow into a trust fund, and there's approval at minutes for what can be spent, then you have a very good track record. And the big thing is you need to accumulate a trust fund, and I'll tell you why. You don't just need management money, you need hobs of other money for another reason. I'll explain to you now. The first thing you guys need to do, as far as I'm concerned, and I sat and thought about this and said, well, you know, I'm not involved here, so what? But what do I think? Okay, I think you need to consolidate. There are too many people involved in too many places, too many people with too much to say, and we're going nowhere. That's my impression. Your wildlife ownership, who owns the wildlife, is an issue that has to be sorted out. In many of these undertakings, we've moved the animals themselves, which have a fixed value and are subject to fluctuations in value and can earn money. We've shifted wildlife to a Section 21 company. In other words, all the animals belong to one entity. This has been my experience. You need an ecological management plan. You need it yesterday, so that everybody has a buy-in to a common set of objectives and goals, not what they think. Everybody has to get together, work out what you think, put it into prioritized objectives and goals, and then buy into it. Everybody. That there's no gaps. You need a qualified manager. You need a seriously qualified manager. You need someone with people skills, someone with life experience, somebody with at least an honors or a BTEC in wildlife management, nature conservation, something like that, knows how to do the job, knows what a fence is, knows what a windmill is, knows how to change a bakkie wheel, knows how a tractor works, and knows how to do a burn, knows how to do a coal, knows what their job is. That is essential. That person is going to be extremely well paid, because they're going to have to deal with every one of you with your kakkies that you've got. Excuse my French. And they're going to be abused, because you're going to phone Joseph and say, is my vehicle running? Is the battery flat because we're coming down the weekend? You need somebody with the goal to say, sorry, this is my job. When you get there, go and have a look and I'll see if I can help you. Because otherwise they get turned into a lackey by wealthy owners. They get bullied. So you need someone with cojones who's going to tell you where to get off. And it's going to tell you where you can't take your vehicle, can't park your vehicle, and stop feeding the kudu toast. That's what you need. They're out there. You need continuity of funding. In other words, the accountability of whoever it is that takes control of management and its decision making need money in the bank. They need to be able to act. They mustn't come hat in hand every time looking for money. It must be there. You need strategic objectives, and your primary strategic objective is expansion of your lands. That's why they need a hob of money, not just management, because for your long-term sustainability, it's essential that you expand your lands under management. It means you're going to have to buy land. Because your long-term sustainability, because Marloth Park is so small, your management input is enormous. As you expand your land, your management input drops, it becomes cheaper to manage. At the moment, you're very small with an enormous management input, which is going to cost a fortune. Thank you. Another slide. I think that might be the end. Right, I'm done. I've now insulted everybody. I'll be around for a while. If anybody wants to ask me any question? No. I have a perfect job. I have, as I say, and I'll clear that up straight away so Garth doesn't have to. I have not charged anyone a cent so far, because it's in my interest in conservation that this works. It's my job, what I do. At some point, God's going to say to me, you now have some expenses, you must start paying for it. Fine, then we'll sort it out. What I've given you here today is free, gratis, and for nothing. It's 35 years of experience in conservation wildlife management. You can have it. What you do with it is your problem and God's. Thank you very much for listening.